A Retrieved Reformation, based on the short story by O. Henry. Background: Jimmy Valentine, the main character in this story, is a safecracker. In other words, he breaks into safes, locking steel boxes used to store money and other valuables. Then he steals each safe's contents. Valentine uses special tools, including drills, to break into the safes he intends to rob. A guard walked into the prison shoe shop. One of the prisoners, Jimmy Valentine, was carefully sewing shoes. The guard took him to the front office. There, the warden, who ran the prison, handed Jimmy his papers. Jimmy had been in prison for nearly 10 months. Now, Jimmy's friends had convinced the governor to set him free. "Now, Valentine," said the warden, "you're not a bad guy at heart. Stop breaking into safes and live a lawful life." At 7:15 the next morning, Jimmy stood in the warden's outer office. On his way out, he got a railroad ticket and a $5 bill, the state's gift to help him rehabilitate himself and go back to normal life. The warden gave him a cigar and they shook hands. Mr. James Valentine walked out into the sunshine. In other words, Jimmy Valentine has been in prison for breaking into safes. After 10 months, the governor sets him free. The warden gives him a railroad ticket, $5, and a cigar. He tells Valentine to be good from now on, and Jimmy leaves the prison. Jimmy went straight to a restaurant. There, he used his freedom to enjoy some chicken and a bottle of wine. This was followed by a cigar that was better than the one the warden had given him. From there, he took a train to a little town near the state line. Jimmy went to Mike Dolan's cafe, got his key, and went upstairs. Everything in his room was just as he had left it. Ben Price's collar button still lay on the floor. It had been torn from that eminent detective's shirt when he had fought with Jimmy during Jimmy's arrest. Jimmy slid back a panel in the wall and dragged out a dusty suitcase. He opened it. The finest set of burglar's tools in the East were inside. Made of special steel, the tools were in the latest designs. Jimmy even had 2 or 3 tools that he had invented himself. The set had cost him over $900. In half an hour, Jimmy went downstairs. He was now dressed in good clothes. He carried his suitcase in his hand. "Got any jobs planned?" Mike Dolan asked genially. Dolan was a friendly sort of guy. "Me?" said Jimmy. He sounded puzzled. "Jobs? I don't understand what you mean. I'm working for the New York Cracker and Wheat Company." Mike thought this was very funny. In other words, freed from prison, Jimmy returns to his room above a cafe and gets his special burglar's tools from their hiding place. His friend Mike Dolan asks him whether he has planned to steal anything. Jimmy jokes with Dolan, saying that he works for a cracker company. A week after Jimmy Valentine's release, a safe was robbed in Richmond, Indiana. There was no clue about who the thief was. Only $800 was stolen. 2 weeks later, another safe in Logansport was opened. $1,500 in cash was stolen. That began to interest the police. Then, an old bank safe in Jefferson City was robbed of $5,000. The losses were now high enough to send the case to Ben Price, the detective. Ben Price said, "Dandy Jim Valentine's stealing again. Yes, I think I'll find Mr. Valentine. The next time I catch him, he'll do his prison sentence without getting out early." Ben Price knew Jimmy's habits. He had learned them while working on an earlier case. Once people heard that Ben Price was trying to catch the elusive thief, people who owned safes felt better. In other words, Within a few weeks of Jimmy's release from the prison, several major burglaries are reported. The police call Ben Price, the famous detective who had arrested Jimmy before. One afternoon, Jimmy Valentine and his suitcase got out of a train in Elmore, Arkansas. Jimmy, who looked like an athletic young man just home from college, went down the sidewalk toward the hotel. A young lady crossed the street, passed him at the corner, and entered a door with a sign saying, "The Elmore Bank." Jimmy Valentine looked into her eyes. He forgot he was a thief. She blushed slightly. Young men with Jimmy's style and good looks weren't often seen in Elmore. Jimmy grabbed a boy who was sitting on the steps of the bank. Jimmy asked him questions about the town. Soon, the young lady came out. She paid no attention to the young man with the suitcase. She just kept walking. Jimmy tried to trick the boy. "Isn't that Polly Simpson?" he asked. "Naw," said the boy. "She's Annabelle Adams. Her pa owns this bank." In other words, Jimmy goes to Elmore, Arkansas, where he sees a beautiful woman named Annabelle Adams. He tricks a boy into telling him her name. The boy also reveals that Annabelle is the banker's daughter. Jimmy went to the Planters Hotel. He signed in, pretending to be someone named Ralph D. Spencer, and rented a room. He leaned on the desk and told the clerk that he had come to Elmore to go into business. How was the shoe business now in the town? Was there an opening? The clerk said that there wasn't a real shoe store in town. Other stores sold some shoes. Business in general was fairly good. He hoped Mr. Spencer would decide to locate in Elmore. He would find it a pleasant town to live in, and the people were friendly. Mr. Spencer thought he would stop over in the town a few days and think about it. He said he would carry up his suitcase himself. It was rather heavy. Mr. Ralph Spencer was the new identity that replaced Jimmy Valentine's real self, all because of love. Mr. Spencer stayed in Elmore and opened a shoe store. He made many friends, and he met Miss Annabelle Adams and became more and more in love with her. In other words, Jimmy changes his name to Ralph Spencer because of Annabelle. He moves to town and opens a shoe store. He has fallen in love with the banker's daughter. By the end of a year, Mr. Ralph Spencer had won the respect of the community. His shoe store was doing well. He and Annabelle were engaged to be married in 2 weeks. Mr. Adams, the country banker, liked Spencer. Annabelle loved him and was proud of him. He was as much at home in her family as if he were already part of it. One day, Jimmy sat down in his room and wrote this letter. He mailed it to the safe address of one of his old friends in St. Louis. Dear old pal, I want you to be at Sullivan's place in Little Rock next Wednesday night. I want to give you my little kit of tools. I know you'll be glad to get them. You couldn't get one like it for $1,000. I quit the old business a year ago. I've got a nice store. I'm making an honest living. I'm going to marry the finest girl on earth 2 weeks from now. I wouldn't touch $1 of another man's money now for $1 million. After I get married, I'm going to sell my store and go west, where there won't be so much danger of being found. I tell you, Billy, she's an angel. She believes in me. I wouldn't do another crime for the whole world. Be there, for I must see you. I'll bring along the old tools with me. Your old friend, Jimmy. In other words, Jimmy leads a new honest life, still pretending to be Ralph Spencer. He and Annabelle plan to get married. He writes to an old friend saying that he is now leading an honest life and wants to give the friend his burglary tools. On the Monday night after Jimmy wrote this letter, Ben Price arrived in Elmore in a horse-drawn buggy. He walked around town in his quiet way until he found out what he wanted to know. From across the street, he got a good look at Ralph D. Spencer. "Going to marry the banker's daughter, are you, Jimmy?" said Ben to himself softly. "Well, I don't think so." The next morning, Jimmy ate breakfast at the Adamses. He was going to Little Rock that day to order his wedding suit and buy something nice for Annabelle. That would be the first time he had left town since he came to Elmore. It had been more than a year now since those last thefts, and he thought he could safely go away. After breakfast, the family went downtown together, including Mr. Adams, Annabelle, Jimmy, and Annabelle's married sister with her 2 little girls. The girls were 5 and 9 years old. First, they came by the hotel where Jimmy still rented a room. He took his suitcase. Then they went on to the bank. Outside stood Jimmy's horse and buggy with a driver. In other words, Jimmy doesn't know it, but Ben Price is in town looking for him. Jimmy plans to go to Little Rock to give away his burglar tools. But before he leaves town, he goes with Annabelle's family to visit the bank. Everyone went inside the banking room. Jimmy set his suitcase down. The Elmore Bank had just put in a new safe. Mr. Adams was very proud of it and wanted everyone to see it. It had a new kind of door. It fastened with 3 solid steel bolts that moved together when a single handle was pushed. And it had a time lock. Mr. Adams proudly explained how it worked to Mr. Spencer. The 2 children, May and Agatha, were delighted by the shining metal and funny clock and knobs. While they were busy, Ben Price sauntered slowly and calmly into the bank. He leaned casually on the counter. He told the teller that he didn't want anything. He was just waiting for a man he knew. In other words, Mr. Adams, Annabelle's father, has a new safe at his bank. The safe has a special time lock. The safe can be opened only at certain times. While Mr. Adams is showing the safe to everyone, Ben Price walks into the bank. He says he's waiting for someone. Suddenly, there was a scream. May, the older girl, had been playing and had shut Agatha inside the safe. She had then pushed the bolts and turned the knob of the numbered dial to make it lock. The old banker ran to the handle. He tugged at it for a moment. "The door can't be opened," he groaned. Agatha's mother screamed again wildly. "Hush!" said Mr. Adams, raising his shaking hand. "Agatha!" he called as loudly as he could. "Listen to me!" They could just hear the child screaming in the dark safe. "My darling!" cried the mother. "She will die of fright! Open the door! Oh, break it open! Can't you men do something?" "There isn't a man nearer than Little Rock who can open that door," said Mr. Adams. "Spencer, what shall we do? That child can't stand it long in there. There isn't enough air. And, besides, she'll go into fits from fright." In other words, Annabelle's young niece, May, accidentally locks her sister, Agatha, inside the safe. No one knows how to get her out, and she may run out of air. Mr. Adams asks Jimmy what to do. Agatha's mother was really scared now. She beat the door with her hands. Somebody wildly suggested that they might blow up the safe with dynamite. Annabelle turned to Jimmy. "Can't you do something? Ralph, try, won't you?" He looked at her with an odd smile. "Annabelle," he said, "give me that rose you are wearing." Hardly believing that she heard him right, she unpinned the rose from her dress and placed it in his hand. Jimmy stuffed it into his vest pocket. He threw off his coat and pulled up his shirt sleeves. Ralph D. Spencer went away, and Jimmy Valentine took his place. "Get away from the door, all of you," he ordered. He set his suitcase on the table and opened it out flat. From that time on, he seemed to be unaware of anything else. He laid out the shining tools swiftly, whistling softly. The others watched him as if they were under a magical spell. In a minute, Jimmy's drill was cutting smoothly into the steel door. In 10 minutes, he threw back the bolts and opened the door. Agatha, frightened but safe, was gathered in her mother's arms. In other words, Annabelle asks Ralph, not knowing that he is really Jimmy Valentine, to help Agatha get out of the safe. To everyone's surprise, Jimmy asks Annabelle for the rose she is wearing. Then he uses his burglar's tools to break into the safe. Agatha is free. Jimmy Valentine put on his coat and walked toward the front door. As he walked along, he thought he heard a far-away voice call, "Ralph!" But he never paused. At the door, a big man stood somewhat in his way. "Hello, Ben," said Jimmy, still with this strange smile. "Found me at last, have you? Well, let's go. I don't know that it makes much of a difference now." And then Ben Price acted rather strangely. "Guess you're mistaken, Mr. Spencer," he said. "Don't believe I recognize you. Your buggy's waiting for you, ain't it?" And Ben Price turned and strolled down the street. In other words, Ben Price watches Jimmy break into the safe to save Agatha. Afterward, Jimmy leaves, not responding to Annabelle's call. Jimmy sees Price and thinks that Price will arrest him. Instead, the detective recognizes that Jimmy is no longer a criminal. He calls Jimmy Mr. Spencer and pretends that he doesn't know who Jimmy is. The detective turns and walks away.